Having surpassed 1,000 completed anime, it's time to review my old favorites and find out what holds up. I'm Sacrabolic, your envoy of hope, and this is Anime Favorite Search. Robotics Notes is the third of the Science Adventure series, and takes place inside of the Steins Gate timeline and has some connections to both Steins Gate and Chaos Head, although it's not really the central focus of the plot, even though some elements and characters are borrowed from both. It has three basic plot lines that are semi-connected, we'll get into it, one of which is the Robotics Research Club, which is headed by a girl named Aki, who is not the main character, we'll get to that too, who is following in the footsteps of her older sister with the intention of creating a 10-foot tall giant robot based off of a popular anime character called Gunbarrel. The second plot, which is more of a subplot really, is about the Gunbarrel anime itself, the disappearance of the series director, who is, I believe, presumed dead, and the mysterious final episode, which is later to reveal to be about a robot uprising and the sun exploding. That's a sort of a spoiler in the show, but you're getting it in the synopsis, because otherwise I can't actually talk about the rest of the show. And the third plot, which is about a mysterious AI girl named Irie, who appears to the series' actual main character, Kai, who then leads him to discover 6/7 reports known as the Kamijima reports that detail the story of a group of 300 people who are secretly controlling the entire world and how they are basically hiding the peculiarities about recent abnormal weather phenomena as well as solar activities that at one point blew out a lot of the technology around the world, and the fact that the sun is going to explode soon. There are links between these three plot lines. The main central thread behind all of them is actually Aki, the head of the Robot Research Club, older sister, who came up with the design that they are trying to build for the giant robot, based it off of Gunbarrel, and then Gunbarrel links to the sun exploding plotline. She also is, and I won't spoil it, also related to the other two plot lines in another way, but we'll hold off on that until never. So there is some links between the plots, but really the three plots actually run primarily independently of each other. In fact, the Gunbarrel anime plot I don't think fully gets resolved in the show. It's like it's brought up, but I don't think it's like properly explored. Whereas the club trying to build a giant robot and the sun exploding being controlled by a group of 300 people for nefarious purposes, those two plots sort of connect. They all connect towards at the end, rather than being interwoven in each individual plot line requiring each other to stand on their own. It's more independent plot lines that converge at the end, and it's really just all there as an excuse to have a giant robot battle. So a sort of thing about Robotics Notes, at least as part of the original sort of pitch promotional material I watched when this was first coming out, was that it was about what it would be like to really build a giant robot, which this is probably nothing like realistically what it would be like for a group of high schoolers to build a giant robot would be a whole lot easier or than what they actually end up having to go through, because most high schoolers aren't going to have to deal with a huge global spanning conspiracy in the production of a giant robot. But it does mean that Robotics Notes intentionally has a sort of degree of realism, which we will get into when we talk more about the characters. But it's also a sort of more modern, realistic take on what is essentially a throwback to old school Super Robo anime, which probably do not need a throwback to, because the Super Robo boom was so fucking long-spanning and so large that it makes the current isekai boom look adorable by comparison. Like, the last thing the world needs is more fucking Super Robo anime. Regardless, that is clearly what Robotics Notes is attempting to sort of bring to the forefront, and why the plot at the end really does sort of read like a Super Robo anime. The realism itself is, I think, actually sort of a major detraction point from Robotics Notes, because as we're exploring this sort of like sun exploding sort of plot line, it's a little bit too fantastical, especially in the context of the actual show, where it's sort of hard to give credence to this idea of the sun exploding, because, like, how do you fight the sun exploding? And in the end, the solution is basically to make sure that what was going to cause it to explode never occurs in the first place. I won't get into that, but that is how they end up doing it. So it's more of like a plot by the main villain than something you can actually fight, which I guess grounds it a little bit more, but it does create this sort of like level of detachment that you would have from the central plot, which is not helped by the fact that Robotics Note sort of lacks a centralized antagonist. When we look back at sort of like Chaos Head, which had its like corporation that's name I don't remember, or we look at Steins Gate, which had CERN, Robotics Note has a sort of semi-antagonist in the Aki's older sister and like her boss that she works for, but the actual main central protagonist actually, as it turns out, spoilers, is actually Ko Komichiba, who was the ones who created the reports in the first place. But because he functions as a twist villain, he doesn't really function so much as sort of like a shadow or an on-screen presence. He just sort of comes out of nowhere. And because of that, Kamijima feels very underdeveloped. He feels like he just sort of shows up and is like, I'm evil. It's time for the big robot fight. And so the sort of like ending battle doesn't really feel earned. I think they do something clever with the actual final fight because we have Kai sort of working on his final opponent and battling them progressively through the medium of video games throughout the entire series, and then manages to sort of win at the end, sort of showing that he has surpassed his limits and his opponent. I'm being dodgy about that on purpose in case anyone ever watches this, but it doesn't make for a very interesting narrative with the twist villain. I think if they were going to have Kamijima be the villain, he shouldn't have been the twist villain. I think he should have had a sort of shadowy presence throughout the entire series so that when he shows up, it feels more earned when he's actually defeated. Robotics Notes also suffers from having probably the weakest main cast in the science adventure series to date, where because it focuses so much on realism, it doesn't carry itself with the sort of fantastical, larger-than-life characters that the series normally uses. So going through them sort of quickly, we have June, who is a sort of cute karate girl who has issues with robots due to a past trauma. Her, I think she's actually totally likable, but with every character, it is worth noting with this main cast, it actually takes longer to ingratiate them. Like, you probably don't start liking any of them, unlike in, say, Chaos Head or Steins Gate, where the cast comes online almost immediately. June is one of the characters I found myself coming to actually like, but mostly it was after she had her entire subplot, which was at least halfway through the anime at that point. Then there is Frau Bao, who I don't think that's her real name, but she's sort of like Daru if Daru was like even less well-adjusted, and she talks basically exclusively in elite speak. And first off, I think that actually makes her hard to understand for myself personally sometimes. But two, she does have this plot line with her mom, who is the director of the Gun Barrel anime. But like I said, I don't feel like that plot line fully gets resolved. I'm not sure I don't recall actually finding out what specifically happened to the mom and who killed the mom. I can certainly make a fucking guess, but it doesn't feel like a fully realized plot line. And because of that, she feels underdeveloped and just feels like an ill-adjusted Daru. So she's definitely one of the ones I didn't end up coming to enjoy. Then there's Subaru, who starts off as a sort of like asshole, better than you underclassman, only to be revealed as the secret like miniature robot fighting world champion who goes under a disguise and puts on a crazy persona called Mr. Pleiades because he's avoiding his fisherman father who wants him to give up creating robots and become a fisherman. And Subaru is easily one of the best characters in the show. And although he's hard to like at the beginning, like the entire cast, he definitely comes online, and I definitely end up enjoying his struggles, especially towards the end, although I would like more time with him after a certain event happens towards the end point of the show. But yeah, Subaru is one of the main casts that's definitely likable. Then we have to talk about Kai, who is actually the main character, and Kai's primary personality trait is he is a complete fucking asshole. But that's pretty common for the science adventure series. But unlike Takumi, who's an asshole because he's literally has psychosis and he's terrified of his own fucking shadow, or Okabe, who's an asshole as a sort of defense mechanism for past traumas, Kai is sort of just an asshole. Like, there's no underlying thing you can use to justify Kai being an asshole. He's just kind of an asshole. He does do helpful, like, kind things, but it's more of an exception to his usual behavior. He's sort of implied to have, like, a heart of gold under everything, and he kind of does, but we don't really see that get worn away throughout the course of the show. We just see peaks of this heart of gold behind a very crusty exterior. And over the course of 22 episodes, I got so fucking sick of that crusty exterior. I also he has this sort of superpower where time slows down for him. And in a show that is intentionally trying to create more grounded characters, I think this superpower is sort of very misplaced. It doesn't feel like it belongs in the context of the universe. I understand that it is explained, and I believe it might have a connection to Chaos Head, but I don't think that sort of justifies the existence of it at the end, and it doesn't ingratiate me to Kai. Kai also has sort of very little on-screen presence, despite having the most screen time. He sort of fades into the background in a lot of scenes as compared to even the other sort of underdeveloped members of the Robot Research Club. Then we have Aki, who is basically used in most of the promotional material, and who I pretty much thought was the main character for a while until watching most of the show and realized, oh, Aki's definitely not the main character. She's definitely just sort of like the main heroine, which is that Aki should absolutely be the main character. She is the best character in the show, and she gives off so much fucking main character energy, which I think was the intention. I think she's supposed to give off main character energy. The problem is that I think the idea is, since it was supposed to be a realistic take, that's why they went with Kai, and also because I think the science adventure series are visual novels where you can date girls and are targeted towards young men. So you need someone, especially in Japanese media, that you can identify with, which is why they go with Kai over Aki. But dear God, is that a mistake from a narrative standpoint? Because Aki has so much more screen presence and charisma than basically any other member of the cast combined. What with her heartfelt speeches about hopes and dreams, how she never gives up, and how she always has an upbeat attitude no matter the situations. But all of this is just being used to bury her own insecurities because she has sort of a shitty older sister who told her that she would never amount to anything. Does this sound like a main character? Of fucking course it does. I just told you the basic template for every main character ever. Now, I could see someone saying, oh, that would just make her generic, but she manages to bring this sort of like beloved underdog charisma that really makes you want to root for her, sort of like unlike everyone else except for arguably Subaru. The thing is, Robotics Notes tries to do a lot of things, but it ends up being really messy, which means that Robotics Notes, despite all of the different threads and all of the different characters and all of the different themes and throwbacks and parodies that it's attempting to do, it ends up actually successfully accomplishing very little. Twitch and Discord in the description. I've been Sacrobolic, your Envoy of Hope. Bye-bye.